Thank you so much for joining us. This is the first Paul G. Wine Zoom tasting, an idea I had wanted to try, and I was so delighted when I pitched it to Carson Wright, and he said, "Yeah, let's do it." So Carson's the general sales manager. Ivory McLaughlin has been a huge help setting it up. Jamie is the Zoom mistress, and she's the reason this works at all. And Ken and I are going to carry the conversation. If you are tasting with us, the order is going to be Latchkey, then Carter, then Bonnie Jean, and then Freedom Hill. And if you're not tasting those wines, that's perfectly fine, because we're gonna cover a lot of ground and hopefully make it a very interesting conversation one way or the other, tasting or not. We also are recording this, so it will be possible to see it again or to share it, or for friends of yours that couldn't make it, they'll be able to access the recording. The chat feature is working, and you can send questions. If we can, we'll get to as many of them as we can. The ones we don't get to, you can email me at paulgwine@me.com. That's all one word, paulgwine@me.com, and I will answer you within a day. I promise. So I think that covers all the bases. The concept is this: I want you to hear some thoughts from two very informed but completely different perspectives. The winemaker, in this case Ken Wright, knows these wines going back to the time that the vines were planted. Maybe the earth was scouted, or he began to work with and manage the vineyard owner according to his requirements, and then on through the whole series of things that occur in the course of a vintage, and then beyond that, the harvest, the crush, the fermentation, and on it goes, right up until the wine is bottled. At that point, that's when I start. About the time the winemaker has finished this whole process of making that wine, I've had nothing to do with any of it and no impressions about any of it until the wine is bottled and released. For me, that's a starting point. So one of the things that I'm very curious to talk to Ken about is how those two perspectives, they're so different, and how that may impact the way we see and taste and evaluate the wines. For me, as a reviewer, I'm almost always tasting wines very young. They've just been released. I taste at home under controlled conditions. When I was reviewing and scoring wines, they were very controlled, and it was blind tasting, and there were a lot of rules and regulations. Now I'm completely independent. I've changed the rules. Now the rules are my rules. And part of that we'll talk about. I don't do blind tastings anymore for a lot of reasons that I can go into and have talked about on my website. But what I do is I spend many hours and even days with the wines. I don't do big tastings. I don't just do a quick impression. I taste these wines over many hours and sometimes many days, because they're young wines. And I think that is the best way and the most respectful way to really give those young wines a chance to show you what's there. So that's, in a nutshell, my methodology. The four wines we're tasting today, I opened about 3 hours ago just to give them a little chance to breathe. And I'm going to turn it over to Ken for a minute and let him talk a little bit about how he came up with these 4 wines. What was the selection process?
Thank you, Paul. I am anxious, actually, to talk about your role too, and how difficult it is, because as a person who's been in the wine business for 45 years now, I know how hard it is to judge early in a wine's life what its course might be, where time will take it. There's some, and I think that's the hardest part about reviewing young wines, because I've made so many misjudgments about young wines, a lot. A great example is 1991. 1991 was a year that was very cool in Oregon, a bit wet late, and the wines were initially, we had small berries. Initially the wines were acidic, tight, tannic, not generous. And when you tasted them at that time when they were young, there was very little flesh on the bones, and people tended, to discount the vintage when they tasted it early. As I did. I was a little worried about the vintage, that where it would go over time. It was amazing. 10 years later, and luckily I stayed in business that long. 10 years later, in the early 2000s, we tasted all of the 1990s often as an industry group. We have a lot of tasting groups within the industry. And without fail, every tasting, the 1991s won the day. They evolved so slowly, but so beautifully, and with such incredible detail. Unlike the warmer vintages that were obvious and lush and in your face early on, those wines needed time.
I agree that the more difficult vintages are certainly oftentimes the hardest to evaluate, and you've had the time to evaluate them from the time you were in the vineyard tasting the grapes, and,
yes.
and you still think, where is this thing going? It's something that I have developed techniques to make predictions about ageability and how a wine will develop, but no one's infallible. What I like to do also is go back into my cellar, and I frequently pull out a wine that is an earlier version of the wine or the winery that I'm reviewing, just to check that part of the palate. Let's talk about the 2019 vintage as a vintage. I know it's gotten good reviews for what it's worth. I don't believe in scoring or reviewing entire vintages, but how was it for you?
2019 was a year where we had modest crop levels, which was great, inherently modest crop levels. We didn't have a high level of fertility, but we had good, it was okay. It wasn't the small vintages of, say, 1998 or say 2020, where the inherent crop level was barely over a ton per acre. Devastating financially for someone growing grapes and making wine. But they were modest. The crop levels were good. We ended up with wines that had a long growing season. We didn't have a lot of vagaries with Mother Nature. We didn't have insanely hot periods of time or terribly cold periods of time. It was very moderate, and moderate is good in the world of Pinot Noir. You don't want lots of highs and lows or a lot of stress. You don't want stress. You want things to be even as you go through the growing season.
So this was not a vintage that caused you any undue concern, and
right.
The wines have been released for a little while now. Let's talk about the first one, and use that as an example, the Latchkey. Is it at this point in it, to me, in its young life, it's not so young for you, is it tasting the way it should, the way you meant it to, the way you wanted it to?
Yes, I think it is. Would you indulge me if I go into, there's a reason we chose the volcanics first, and then we're working our way into the sedimentary sites, the marine sediments. Would you indulge me with a little geology?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Ivory's going to help me. We're going to look at we want to talk about the events. Thank you. So on the screen now, for the folks that are participating, thank you, Ivory. Mm-hmm. On the screen now, you see the western coast of North America, and I have a little red dot that is below my finger. You can see now, and I'm going to show you what matters. So over the last 200 million years, the Juan de Fuca plate, which is here and is subducting underneath our coastline. Okay, this plate had this activity of subducting underneath our coastline has been going on for 200 million years. As the plate subducts, you can see that there's a point where it meets landmass, and where it meets landmass, that landmass shaves the sand off the top of that plate, and that sand accumulates. You can see this accumulation of sand right here in this bit of a yellow triangle. Okay, so our coastline used to be halfway across our state. Where we meet California existed, but the coastline of Oregon went straight to Idaho. Half of Oregon was created by this activity. This collection of scrapings has been extending our coastline from used to be way back here.
Pretty much where I am now.
Hello, exactly.
Was the coast, yeah.
Well, you're in Walla Walla, right?
Yeah, Waitsburg. Yeah.
Waitsburg.
Essentially Walla Walla.
You're in God's country.
Yes,
so,
I am.
Yes, you are. And so exactly. And so this half of Oregon, the northwest half of Oregon, was Pacific Ocean. Washington State was all Pacific Ocean, and most of British Columbia. So today, you come forward in time geologically, and we're here. So this is where the coastline exists, but we're still making landmass every moment of every day. Okay, we're going to extend. We'll eventually extend all the way out until we get to the Pacific Plate, the mid-ocean ridge, and that's where it'll stop. But that's what we're building toward that. So now we'll go to the next slide, if we could. Might have to go to, yeah. There
You have to taste the wine too.
But you do have to taste the wine too. So now, oh, sorry. Hello. Let's try this one. So our coastline was here. Okay.
Yep.
We created this half of the state, all of that. All right. So that was all created by the plate activity. All of that was sand. All it was the scrapings of the top of the Juan de Fuca plate that created this landmass. That was over 200 million years. The next big event was here. So the Blue Mountains, which now today are very quiet, and they are not threatening anymore. But 15 million years ago, the Blue Mountains were the most violent volcanoes in the world, right here.
I never knew.
It's a crazy town. They issued so much lava that they filled in a massive basin in the middle of Oregon where Bend is. They filled that in with a half a mile of lava that cooled to andesite. And then once that filled in, they just kept coming west because it was all downhill. The Cascades did not exist. Mount Hood did not exist. St. Helens, Rainier, none of Sisters, none of it. And so it was all downhill, and it sent a flood of lava over the Willamette Valley here that covered the sand. with a thin layer, a veneer of lava that cooled to basalt. Those two events created this region big time. And they created the mother rock, whether it be marine sediment or basalt. They created the mother rock that dictates what you smell and taste in our Pinot Noir. It's the profile of our wine. It's all dictated by that mother rock below soil. Soil is not important. It is not. It's the place where things degrade. That's true. It's important to health. That's true. It is not about wine quality. Nothing to do with complexity and nuance and detail. Detail comes from what's below soil, mother rock. And so I start tonight, and forgive me. So we're starting with the volcanics. Can we go back to his screen, the main screen? So we're starting with the volcanics because the volcanics to me are more direct and laser-like and fruit-focused, because that's what basalt does. Once our root system gets deep enough, gets below soil and begins engaging that mother rock, that topical basalt that came from the Blue Mountains, once you begin to engage it, then you uptake all those elements that are in it, including lots in the volcanics, lots of iron, lots of manganese, lots of qualities that in the end, once they're taken up, create this fruit-driven, laser-like profile. So we started there.
Just to put a fine point on it, then the Latchkey vineyard would be one where the basalt, the volcanic, the rock is close to the surface, so it's accessible.
Yes, sir. This is volcanic. This is Dundee Hills. So in our region, the reality is that 95% of the Willamette Valley is not suitable for world-class wine. But the 5% that is insane. It is incredibly fantastic. It's a great gift. It's an incredible gift. And it is amazing though the influence of that parent material. Once the roots are deep and and that's why you love and treasure older vineyards. Once those roots are deep and they're past soil and they're engaging that mother rock, it's like the light turns on in the room and all of a sudden you're seeing all this detail. It's just incredible.
Of course, as soon as you talk about mother rock and I sniff the Latchkey, all of a sudden the minerality and the rock aromatics pop right out. Of course, we're all prone to that kind of suggestion, but it also has I love the aromatics of this wine and really all of your wines. I use a glass that is not the common Pinot Noir glass, and I have tried many, believe me. This is my go-to glass for Pinot Noir. It's made by Gabriel Glass.
No, I've never seen that. That's a cool glass.
Gabriel Glass, GLAS.
Where do you get it?
You can go onto their website, and they are distributed here in North America. And they only make the one glass. They make it in two versions, expensive and really expensive. But one reason I have, and I've tried them all, I love this glass for the aromatics, the way it funnels perfectly the aromatics of Pinot Noir. And so that popped out to me along with some red fruits and some spice. I know you don't go heavy on the new oak, and I never find a lot of new oak influence because I imagine that would, in your view, get in the way of the real, what's important.
To me, Paul, when we look at world-class wine from anywhere on this planet, you never discuss oak. The greatest wine on this planet has never been about oak. It's actually criminal. if someone were to work with world-class fruit and to make oak a part of the profile of the wine, they, because of their ego, will get kicked to the curb soon enough. You don't dishonor world-class fruit by shaping it, influencing it. I mean, that's just, you don't do that. You protect it. What you do is you receive that gift and you protect, and you make sure that those qualities that are insanely beautiful are evident in the glass. And that never happens through use of oak, except very judiciously, very judiciously.
And I agree with that. And I think it's part of the evolution of the education of the American palate for all of us, especially those that can go back a ways and started tasting wine, back in the 70s or the 80s, when oak was a big deal, and the more the better. And
That's right.
I think it had a lot to do with just palates that had not been educated, had not tasted a lot of wine, and wines that didn't have the kind of complexity for whatever reason. The vines were young. Maybe they weren't even planted in the right place. I know in Washington, they were started by farmers that, said, well, we got asparagus and onions, let's throw some grapevines in the ground because we already have the overhead irrigation, so it'll save us some money. That didn't make for the best wines. I think that palates have evolved, and certainly winemaking and viticulture have evolved to the point where you don't need all that new oak. And I agree with you. It can be helpful in a little bit. It's an accent. It's a spice. Maybe it's something you use artistically and minimally. And I really see across the industry, and I know you do a lot of work with the trade on premise as well as distributors. And my sense is that the preferences are going in the direction of subtlety, of more elegant wines, and more complexity, which is all to the good.
I agree. I think people want to be connected. They want to be connected through wine to place. And the overuse of oak is like putting way too much lipstick on a beautiful person. You don't do that. You don't do that. You don't destroy natural beauty. There's no need to add to that.
We should probably move on to the second wine, but we did have someone wanted to know about the name Latchkey. What does that refer to?
So Latchkey was founded by a couple that just a terrific couple that own this vineyard, the Baldwins. They have the Campbells, Scott and Michelle. Scott and Michelle, they both shared that they were latchkey kids, or they were in households where they let themselves back into their homes during school hours as young children. And Scott's middle name, in fact, is Key. He's actually related to Sir Francis Scott Key.
Oh, really?
Yeah, of all people. And so Latchkey became something of a theme between the two of them. And plus, when they thought of creating a vineyard, because they're both in kind of high tech, if you will, in the Portland area, and this vineyard was their an outlet to a natural environment. And so if you look at the label, in fact, shows this is the next wine, but the label for a Latchkey shows a door is being opened and a bird that's holding a key in its beak, getting ready to fly out to a vineyard. And it's kind of where their souls were going, away from indoor out to the natural environment and breathing and exhaling again. And so that's what's behind all that.
Very nice. And this is Dundee Hills AVA.
Correct.
All right, well, let's, I'm just gonna have to crack the whip and keep us
Do
rolling
it.
here. So wine number 2 is the Carter Vineyard, which
Yes.
is Eola Amity Hills. So
Yes.
we're getting a look at 4 different AVAs here, as well as the 4 different vineyards.
Right.
So please tell us a little bit about Carter and how it ended up being your selection.
Well, Carter was a vineyard that we've had a long history with. I began in 1989. I actually made the wine. I created Eola Hills Wine Cellars for the Huggins family, and we brought their fruit in to actually. We actually fermented it, got the wine started, and then sent it down to Napa to William Hill in 1989. And I remembered as I took that fruit in, it was stunningly beautiful. It had an incredible flavor to it. The raw fruit did. And as we got it started, I hated seeing that fruit going down the road. I felt especially bad it was going to California. Sorry. And I thought, that is a crime. That fruit should be here. I would love to have that. And so I called Jack and Kathleen Carter. And I said, hey, you guys, please, can we talk about me buying this fruit from you? And they said, yes, absolutely. And we did. So we began our relationship in 1990. And it was insanely fantastic from the start. A tiny little 5-acre spot in the beginning. It has now grown to about 22 acres. We began farming Carter in 1997. And then we ended up purchasing the vineyard in 2015, I think. I think Ivory will check me on that, but I think 2015. And it's a site that it's home for us. We love it. We love the qualities of it. And so it's one of our owned sites.
Is it, are these still, at least in part, some of the original vines?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, what's amazing, Paul, is that generally Phylloxera, the insect which destroys own-rooted plants, generally it's worked its way through most of the vineyards in the valley now. It began in 1990 at Fuquay Vineyard in the Dundee Hills. But it's worked its way through the valley, destroying amazing vineyards of age and where people had to restart, unfortunately. At Carter, we have an amazing young man. Well, he's actually over 40 now, but he started with me when he was 14. And that was
Wow.
Seth Miller. He has a crazy green thumb, and he has kept, though Phylloxera began here probably 8 years ago, but he has been spoon feeding these vines. I mean, spoon feeding with nutrition since this first attack over 8 years ago. Normally they would be gone by now, but they are still actually producing. They will eventually go away, but they're still healthy enough.
I really love old vine wines. I really believe that old vines, obviously, if they're in the right place and well tended, give you the subtlety and the nuance and the aromatics and the details. You have to look for them. You have to dig a little bit. Part of what helps, I believe, in a wine like this is that the alcohol is down around, it's under 13%. There's no huge burst of oak. And so if you get the balance with the acid, and if you get the ripeness through the tannins and can still keep it inside those lighter parameters, to me, that's when the aromatics really shine. And in terms of reviewing, I like to find, when I did score wines, high scoring wines had to have a full spectrum from the aromatics on through, no holes in the palate, balance throughout. length in the finish, detail at both ends. And that's, to me, what makes a great wine. It's not about necessarily power.
Right.
You know, we can talk about those vintages that are perfect from the get-go. Those are not always the most age-worthy wines. They often shine in their youth and then they fade.
Absolutely. So I want to show something. You love older vines. I want to show a slide. I want to show you what I believe about why you and I both share that love. If you look at this slide, so you see as a vine develops, thank you. As a vine develops in the early years, you're only in soil in those first few years. So in general, a vine in a normal situation will probably increase by a foot of depth every year. And unless there's some impediment, that vine will end up being 25 to 30 feet deep, no problem. And so in the early years, you're only here, you're only from top to bottom, you're only in soil. And in soil, you do have nitrogen, you have water, and those are important to health, but they have nothing to do with nuance, with trace elements. It isn't until the vine gets into that parent material deeply, and it will, when it gets deeply in that parent material and it spreads, that's when you begin the uptake of all the trace elements that create definition in the wine, whether it's, again, manganese, phosphorus, zinc, copper, iron, sodium, calcium, you name it, that's where it's at. That's the cache. Down here, that's the cache of mineral, and that's your opportunity to begin to see complexity. And that takes time. It just takes time.
This was years ago. I was traveling in Champagne, and I was in the caves at one of the big champagne producers. I don't remember which one. You know, and the thing about Champagne, it's all about chalk. And, you know, you're literally in a cave. I mean, it's a genuine cave. It's not a man-made cave. It's a cave, and it's chalk everywhere. And they said, look at the ceiling, you know, and it was vaulted, and it was 25, 30 feet up there. And there were roots coming down. And they said, that's our vineyard. That's when I really got the visual about that. Hey, speaking of which, do you by any chance have a slide that you can show people the different AVAs? I have a question about where's the Yosemite Hills.
We may. Let me hang on a second here.
If you have that,
Oh no, I think we probably do.
That would be helpful.
What's that? Nope, that's the other one. That's sorry, my fault. Let's try it again.
I should have thought of this sooner, but it's
so Paul,
probably
this does not really have it, but but here's the Willamette Valley in total,
right?
You know, so the area that is world class is tiny. It's tiny, and it's right here, right there. That's it. And that's where we, beginning in 1995, we began as an industry to describe, and we applied with federal applications, and I wrote one of them. We applied to the federal government to recognize 6 regions here, including Dundee, the Yosemite Hills, Yamhill Carlton, Chehalem Mountains, Ribbon Ridge, and McMinnville, all right here. Boom. This is the sainted country for Pinot Noir in our region. This is insanely beautiful, an insanely beautiful location where Pinot Noir wants inherently to be great, not good, great.
And it has been further subdivided. You now have Laurelwood, you've got Ribbon Ridge. There's a couple other new ones. So, you know, the work goes on, but it is all concentrated in that smaller area. Eola Amity Hills has always had a signature of a little more of the herbal, not herbaceous, but a little more of the herbal, earthy components. And back in the day, they were a little too obvious. The wines oftentimes seemed that they hadn't quite gotten ripe enough, but now that region is really knocking it out of the park for Chardonnay. Not just the Pinots, but the Chardonnays from there are absolutely world-class, mind-blowing wines.
They're beautiful. No, I think that was a matter of Eola was planted a bit later than most regions. Dundee was first, beginning in 1966, when Dave Lett and Charles Curry planted in 1966. All the books say 1965, by the way, and they're all wrong. Just saying.
Oh, I plead guilty. I always say 65. It was 66.
It's 66, totally 66. David and I were very close. Our wineries were 4 blocks from each other for 8 years, and we shared a lot of cups of sugar over a long time. And it always made him crazy that and I'm not going to bash on writers, but a writer wrote an article. Maybe I am going to bash. A writer wrote an article saying that the industry started in 1965 and with David Lett, but actually David, he and I would laugh about it, where he said, no, I did take my vines, my nursery vines, to Oregon State. They were in a nursery in 1965. That's true. But then I took them out of the nursery and planted them in 66. So that's the actual story.
And Curry, the same thing.
Curry started in 66 as well. Actually, what's really amazing is that the two of them came from UC Davis the same year, both got their masters from UC Davis, came to the region believing in Pinot Noir in Oregon. They got an apartment together, of all places, out near Silverton, thinking that was the great spot for the next world-class Pinot Noir region. But they struck out. They could not find property. And as a second choice, David saw an ad for a place in the Dundee Hills and bought it. And that's how the industry got started.
Wow. And just to put another piece of that puzzle together, the Charles Curry Winery is now David Hill. It's under new ownership. However, they are painstakingly renovating some of those original plantings and a lot of different things, not just Pinot Noir, because Curry just stuck a whole lot of stuff in the ground, as they did experimentally. And you can still get some wines from the David Hill Winery that are from those original plantings. We're going to have to move on again, but there is another question in a elevator type speech. Can you draw some differences between these first two AVAs, Dundee Hills and Eola Amity?
Well, for me, I think that you actually nailed it when you said you thought the first wine showed a lot of red fruit. For me, the biggest difference between Dundee and Eola is that the profile, fruit driven for me, generally fruit driven, is more red in Dundee. And when we get down to Eola, it's more blue. I get more blue and I get darker fruits in Eola. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that's the biggest difference. Plus, I think because Eola gets that aggressive wind from the Van Duzer corridor, which shuts the vines down mid-afternoon, they tend to be later to ripen. It's cooler. It's a cooler region, and the acidity is a little more elevated, and so there tends to be a little more structure, I think, in Eola. There's a little more firmness in Eola than Dundee. Dundee tends to be a little more lush, emollient, right out of the gate. But again, red fruited and emollient versus darker fruited and more structured in Eola. That's my take.
All right. Let's go on to the Bonnie Jean, and we're moving to a third AVA, and this is your home. This is your home.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
So give us a little history on the vineyard and what is specific to this AVA.
So Yamhill Carlton is a re-exposure of the original sands. This is a place where the covering of volcanic material that came from the Blue Mountains 15 million years ago is totally gone. It's weathered, eroded, it's gone. And that old sand is re-exposed. And soil has now formed, not much, but soil has now formed above it, about 3 or 4 feet max in terms of soil on the ridge lines. This is not valley floor. Nothing valley floor works. These are all these wines, all of the quality wines come from ridge lines, because only on the ridge lines will the vines root to parent material. And the valley floor is just soil. You have 150 feet of soil, and then salt water. Not good. And it's too rich,
No.
too wet, and too late. The vines, they ripen too late. And so they often endure a lot of late rain events. So you got to be in the ridge lines, number one. So this is in the Yamhill Carlton area. This is the AVA, the American Viticultural Area, that I authored years ago. And again, all sand. It's like a horseshoe-shaped set of hills, with McMinnville being at the bottom of that horseshoe, the open end of the horseshoe, if you will, and Gaston to the north being the top of that horseshoe. And they're low-lying hills that range from essentially 200 feet to about 750 feet in elevation. And these are very, very old. When you only have to go down 3 feet and you're engaging 40 million year old sand. Sandstone, very old sandstone and siltstone, very, very old. And it's very decayed. And fractured. So when you dig a pit, and we do this a lot for a lot of the kids who are doing geology at the universities and professors, we'll dig a 10-foot pit. They get to go down into it and look, describe it, look at it, measure it. Essentially, you're going to see about 3 feet of soil development, and then you're going to see this very degraded sand and old and compacted sand. But you can reach into it, Paul, and you can just crush it with your hand. It's so fragile.
Do you find fossils of any kind? Sea life?
Absolutely. You find shells and sea creatures, in fossilized form down there without question.
Yeah.
It's pretty fantastic, actually. And it's amazing it's amazing that you're only a few feet deep and you're into tens of millions of years of age. It's just crazy town. I love it, but it's pretty neat. So this area, what we see generally, so we looked at the volcanics first and their profile, which is more fruit driven. The sedimentary sites tend to be less fruit driven and more about spice and floral, savory. We see things like chocolate, tobacco, cedar, anise, clove, mushroom, fresh turned earth, all of these different things, qualities that are not about fruit. And it doesn't mean that it's more complex, not at all. It just means it's a different profile. And it doesn't mean and there's no right or wrong thing about this. It's about what pleases you as a person and what you're drawn to. Some people love spice, some people don't. Some people love floral, some people don't. And it's all good. It's whatever pleases you, and it's about you enjoying those qualities that you respond to.
And once again, and I'm not trying to sell this particular stemware, but anyone that is enjoying very fine wine, and especially Pinot Noir, which is among the most aromatic of the reds, you owe it to yourself to make sure your stemware is up to the challenge.
Good on you.
If you're not getting the aromatics, you're not getting the wine. The aromatics are, I've seen I don't know where these numbers come from, but 60%, 2/3 of the overall taste experience of a wine is through your nose, not through your palate.
Good on you, Paul. Man, my God. I mean, and that's what and you understand that the detail in Pinot Noir, the breadth of expression is so fantastic. To me, by far, it's the greatest variety in the world. By far, the greatest variety in the world, because of that breadth of expression, the ability to connect us to place like none else. No other variety can do that. Every other variety will have an inherent quality in its DNA, whether it's spice or herbaceousness or whatever it might be, that compromises place, overrides place. Pinot Noir to me is a direct conduit. It's like getting plugged in to a place. And that is so special. And you're right, the glassware, though, the glassware is everything. You want to see every nuance, because Pinot Noir needs room. It needs room in the glass to express itself. And so good on you.
But even for all wines, I can't tell you how many times I've been to someone's home, someone who loves wine, collects wine, has really expensive wine, and really cheap stemware that doesn't do the wine any favors at all. I love to tell people, and this is the easiest experiment to do. Take a wine, any wine, but a good wine, maybe a wine from your cellar, and lay out 6 different glasses. And they don't all have to even be wine glasses. You know, I always include one of these tumblers when I do the 6-glass challenge. 6 different glasses, and that wine will taste different in every glass, every time. And if people never believe me until they do it. And this is how you find the glass that's going to work for you. And it doesn't have to be a different glass for every wine, believe me. And I've been there and done that. This is my glass for more than half of the wines I taste and review. And I've got a few others that I play around with. And actually for white wines, I have a very inexpensive glass that actually works quite well, that I'm happy with. But it's really important to play around and find stems, and they don't have to be expensive, but find the ones that work and they give you the whole wine.
Right, exactly.
So before we move on, I want to talk a little bit about ABV, finished alcohol. These first 3 wines, I have 12.5, 12.8, and 12.6. Those are, historically low numbers, but in all 3 cases, I think these wines are absolutely perfectly balanced. And those the lower finished alcohol enables more subtle detail. But I seem to recall that, 15, 20 years ago across Oregon, those numbers were much higher.
Well, there was when I began, so you and I are not too different in age, perhaps, but when I began enjoying wine and making wine in the 70s in California, a typical alcohol level on incredibly beautiful wines at that time was 12%.
Yeah.
12%. And 12% was normal. And that was a normal amount of alcohol. And the wines were gorgeous. They were balanced. They were beautiful. But then there came a point, and this is maybe a wine writer thing, Paul, but there came a point where, and this is when the Spectator was this 5-page tabloid. Okay. Seriously, that looked like your 5 and dime that was folded in half. It was very, very, very basic. Spectator had just begun. But Robert Parker began, and I love Robert Parker. He's an amazing individual, actually. I think the world of him. But there was a promotion at the time, and he was part of it, and good on him. It's all good. But there was a promotion at the time of wines that were huge out of the glass, including a lot of alcohol, a lot of power, not as much grace, but a lot of power. And that happens when you're having wine in a if you have a lineup of 20 wines on your table and you're trying them all, well, you know, and you're not trying them necessarily with food. It's just cocktail hour, and you're trying these wines, and clearly the wines that have the most alcohol are gonna have the most power in the glass. They're gonna be noticeable. They're gonna register with you. But they would probably not be the wine that you would like at dinner with the food you're about to have. When you're having dinner, they'll be too much. But if it's a cocktail wine, they're very impressive, just because of their size.
Well, this also gets back to my theory of, you know, the development of the palate, because none of us grew up in France and were trained to evaluate and enjoy wine from a young age, unless you were exceptionally lucky. I never saw a bottle of wine till I was in college, and at that point it wasn't a very good bottle of wine.
Exactly.
So, you know, I think, and we're as a culture, we're oriented toward visuals first and foremost, and sounds or music secondly, and flavors and scents take a way back seat. And those senses are equally valuable and equally sensitive and important, but they have to be trained. Just like a musician trains his or her ear, the better your ear, the better you're gonna be as a player. It's the same with tasting wine. You have to train your palate. You have to pay attention. You have to, you don't have to read a lot of books, although I love it when you read books, but you have to pay attention to every single wine, and you have to give it that time and attention, and specifically train your nose and your palate to dive in. And it's really hard because we don't have the language for it. But I think that in the earlier days, what you could taste was oak, because it was delicious and there, and big, bold, fruity wines, because they were big and bold and fruity, and a little punch from the alcohol. What I've seen is, as people, especially those that are in the business and tasting a lot of wine, they tend to gravitate toward higher and higher acid and lower alcohol.
Right.
Does that match with your thinking?
Totally. So I wanted to mention that for people, and I'm sure that folks of all experience levels in wine are tuning in, but I wanted to share with them, when I was at UC Davis, one of my courses I took my first year there was with Ann Noble. And Ann Noble, she was a first year professor, and she made us do blind tastings, not knowing what additive, chemical additive she had done to a base white wine, in order for us to try to identify what she'd added, what was the aroma, and at what point were we sensitive to it, at what concentration. And we did this for a semester. As an example, I remember the very first day we did you do a set, and it's all white wine from tank that has no influence from barrel, etc. Very, very basic. And I remember we did the first lineup of wine. We had 4 wines. You had the control, and then you had 3 additions. And for me, the wines were reeking of banana, just reeking of banana. And so she gave everybody time to taste. She says, "Okay, who thinks they know what we added?" And I raised my hand, being the amazing student, right, saying, "Oh, I think I'm smelling banana, like big time." She goes, "You're right, Ken. It's amyl acetate. That's the smell of banana." "And when did you get it?" And I said, "First wine, the first edition." immediately. I got it right off the bat. And there's a person next to me, a gal next to me in the cubicle who looked at me like, wow. She goes, I got nothing. They all smelled exactly alike. And I started thinking, well, maybe I've got something going here. Might have talent. And it's something. And then the next set goes down. And all 4 wines, I'm smelling all 4 wines. I get nothing. They all smell exactly alike. And the gal next to me who did not get the banana is looking at me and winking like she's got me.
Cookie has to go out.
And it turns out, so Anne asked, okay, who does anybody think they know what this is? And my neighbor raises her hand. She goes, it smells to me like tack, like leather, like horse, like saddles. And she said, that's exactly it. That's the smell of leather. And I never got it. She got it incredibly. So this little aroma wheel that we created from that class, this aroma wheel is a good way for people to begin to learn to describe what they're tasting. It's very basic. It starts in the center with basic descriptors of fruit, spice, floral, etc. And then it gets into detail, but it's something worth looking at.
And it's also a point, you make a very important point, which is not all palates are built alike. And,
right.
and part of the learning process is what you're more and less sensitive to.
Right.
And there's certainly room for subjective opinion, and the old whatever you like is a good wine. There's some truth to that. Right. On the other hand, there are certain benchmarks for all wines that do indicate levels of quality. Right. I think we should move on. We're going to run a little over, and I promised people it would be just an hour, but let's go on to Freedom Hill, famous vineyard. When I did a piece on what I thought were the top 5 vineyards that were widely used in Oregon. In other words, they weren't just great because somebody was making great wine, but they were vineyards that a lot of really quality winemakers were using. And Freedom Hill was one of those 5. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, they're now part of the newest AVA, correct?
They are.
Not my favorite name.
No.
But this is a family show, but the actually AVA name is Mount Pisgah. Yes.
Yeah.
I would have chosen something else, but hey.
All good.
So tell us a little bit about Freedom Hill and if you can, the AVA.
So we began working with Freedom Hill in 1987 with Dan and Helen, the Deshay family. Dan and Helen, wonderful couple who planted it and managed it for years and years. Their son Dustin has created a succession for them, which is awesome. And he's been managing it now for several years, doing a terrific job, just terrific job. But this is down in an area that's, it's our southernmost site for Pinot Noir in the Coast Range. And it's, it's only 15 miles or so from the ocean. So it's a cool area. And it's also affected by the Van Duzer Corridor, which is a direct shot. It's a valley to the ocean, if you will, which brings in cold air every day. Serious cold air that comes in at 20 miles an hour, 25 in the afternoon, replacing the warm air that's rising in the valley every day, and definitely shutting vines down in that area and lengthening season, which is good. That effect ends up delaying ripening, giving more hang time, which is good, as long as you're not getting wiped out by rainfall, and we don't there, but it creates more hang time, which hang time equals complexity, without question. The longer you're on the plant, the more complexity you're going to have in flavor and aroma. And so it's an area that has a very long growing season. It has made a lot of successful wines. So we've been there since '87. We've been there longer than anyone, but longer than anyone.
I think this is just a beaut. I'm just, I keep smelling and smelling these wines. And the longer they sit open and the longer they're even in the glass,
Yeah,
more that comes up and comes out, which is
Yeah.
why I so object to the, I'm going to taste 100 wines, take a swirl, type my note, put a number on it and move on. It is just the wrong way to review wines.
So I have a question for you. I mean, it's a big direction change for you because you were doing scoring and I mean, you were a very influential in the world of wine criticism, and scoring has been part of that world. To me, I love the fact that you're taking it a different direction, and really looking at the whole, the entire body of work of a region and the people, and you're pursuing that. But what brought you there? Why did you go there?
Well, it was a long process, Ken, and I started, I actually tried to use different systems and to reinvent. I even in my Washington wine book, I rather stupidly thought I could reinvent the 100-point system, and I put a lot of time and effort into it, and it was a complete failure. But quite honestly, the magazine that I was working for, Wine Enthusiast, required that you score. And so, you know, you want to be employed, you're going to score the wines. I tried to score as fairly as possible, and I tried to put in all the other work that made those reviews more valuable, but the scoring was required. Part of the reason that I have moved on, and with no criticism, I had 23 years at the Wine Enthusiast, wonderful people, very supportive, and especially supportive, not just of me, but of Oregon and Oregon wines, really. So nothing but good things to say about that experience. But I reached a point where I thought, you know, if you're ever going to just jump in and do it exactly the way you want to do it, now's the time. So that's why I'll put in a plug. That's my website, paulgwine.com. I put up an essay and reviews every week. It's all free. There's no advertising. I'm completely independent, no rules, no regulations other than what I've posted up, my methodology. And if I post up a review and a recommendation, it's because out of all the wines I've tasted that week or that month, this is a standout wine. And we'll see. I hope the trade will ultimately move away from just using the numbers. But I thought the only way I could make the point was to just say no more numbers, rather than trying to set myself up independently and retain the scoring. So financially, it makes no sense. But in terms of creative freedom, it makes all the sense in the world.
Well, I want to tell everybody who's tuning in that, number one, I've known you for a long time. Ever since, ever since you were in my living room playing guitar, a couple decades ago. And you're a person of integrity, and I love that you've done this. But you're a great writer as well, and you have the ability to convey a lot of fabric in your writing of place, and I think it's really a great talent, honestly. So I hope that people follow you, because if they do, they're going to learn a lot more about a region than stupid scoring, just simple scoring. It's going to be about fabric and texture and depth, and about people, place, and a whole lot more than nothing that, scoring can't begin to reveal what you have the ability to tell.
Well, that's very kind, and thank you for that. And I do hope people will check into the website. You know, we're living in a digital world where people have 2 minutes, maybe if they're being generous. So I've designed it to be quick, although if you have the time, there's more depth. So I think we should probably wrap this up. I will take questions at email me at paulgwine@me.com. I will put up tasting notes on all these wines and all the other wines that you sent me, which I've been saving because I didn't want to be prejudiced. So I'll be tasting them, and we'll do a post a week from Saturday that'll cover a lot of this material. And I'll probably shoot you an email, Ken, and ask you a few more questions. But I just what a delight to spend this time with you.
I want to thank Ivory too for assisting you and I to get through the technological parts of this.
Thank you.
And Jamie, but Ivory was at my side making all the buttons push correctly.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Ivory. Thank you, Ken. And it's been a real, and thank you everyone that joined us. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Paul.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
That was awesome. You guys did a great job. Really, really enjoyed it.
Push sleeve.